In the world of multi-billion-dollar syndicate negotiations, a single mistranslated word can start a war or end a life. That's why they took her. Evelyn Shaw was a quiet archivist until the night a covert cell kidnapped her from the library stacks. They didn't want a ransom. They needed a translator for a deal so volatile, getting it wrong meant a bullet for everyone in the room. But they made one fatal mistake. They only knew one of her languages. Evelyn Shaw, to the world she was a forgettable fixture in the rare manuscripts department, but in certain shadowed circles, her name was whispered as a ghost, a hyper-polyglot who could negotiate in 12 languages without a trace of an accent. She had buried that talent, choosing silence over the dangerous visibility it brought, until tonight. Now, locked in a conference room with armed men, she holds the only key to a deal spanning 3 continents. But the real question isn't whether she can translate their words. It's whether she can control the meaning and turn their own negotiation into a trap. 8 hours earlier, Evelyn's world was one of controlled silence. The only sounds in the rare book's archive were the whisper of turning pages and the hum of climate control. She liked it that way. Here, among 15th-century treaties and coded diplomatic correspondence, her gift was just another tool for cataloging, not a weapon. She had built this life deliberately after Madrid. After the incident, where a simple mistranslation during a corporate merger briefing had nearly gotten a client killed, she learned then that in the wrong ears, perfect fluency was a liability. So she vanished, becoming Evelyn Shaw, the quiet archivist with a talent for dead languages and no living connections. Her last patron of the night was a man named Mr. Vasco. He requested a folio of maritime trade agreements from the Baltic region, 1740. He was polite, well-dressed, and his eyes never left her hands as she handled the vellum. He left just before closing. Evelyn didn't think twice. She finished her shift, changed into her coat, and stepped into the chilly parking garage. That's when the van door slid open. A hand clamped over her mouth, another around her waist, and she was lifted off her feet. No scream, just the smell of stale tobacco and the roar of an engine. A hood went over her head. They didn't speak. When the hood came off, she was here, a sterile, windowless conference room in what felt like an industrial park. The air smelled of new carpet and fear. 4 men surrounded a polished table. At its head was a man in his late 50s with silvering hair and eyes the color of flint. Victor. She knew his face from Interpol bulletins she'd passively absorbed during her old life. Victor Orlov, not a syndicate boss, the syndicate boss. His empire moved pharmaceuticals, arms, and people across Eastern Europe, and he was staring at her like she was a faulty piece of equipment. "You are the linguist," he stated, his Russian accent thick as tar. "I'm a librarian," Evelyn corrected, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. She used English testing. Victor smirked. He replied in flawless Parisian-accented French. "A librarian who, in 2019, mediated a ceasefire between the Daxiang and Luo cartels in Macau. You spoke Mandarin, Vietnamese, and Portuguese. They called you the ghost. No recordings, no transcripts, just results." Evelyn's blood went cold. That job was buried under 7 layers of false identities. That wasn't me. Victor switched to rapid-fire Italian. "Do not waste my time with denials. I have a negotiation. In 3 hours. The other party speaks exclusively in a very specific dialect of Uzbek. My usual translator is indisposed. You will translate, word for word, nuance for nuance. You will be a pane of glass." "And if I refuse?" One of the men, a younger, colder version of Victor with a scar through his eyebrow, placed a photograph on the table. It was a live feed. Her elderly neighbor, Mrs. Gable, was watering her window box petunias. The timestamp was current. The scarred man, introduced only as Ilya, spoke in low German. "We do not ask twice. You translate, she lives. You play here, she drowns in her own flower box." The stakes were set. This was the brutal arithmetic of her skill. But Evelyn had spent years in archives studying not just language, but subtext, the hidden meanings in trade deals, the double entendres in peace accords. She knew something they didn't. In high-stakes deals, the translator isn't just a conduit. They are the architect of reality. They can soften a threat, exaggerate a concession, or invent a misunderstanding that changes everything. The dossier was slid toward her. It outlined a joint venture. Victor's organization was brokering a deal with a Central Asian syndicate to secure a new smuggling route through the Caspian Sea. The numbers were astronomical, nine-figure astronomical. But as Evelyn scanned the technical specifications of shipping lanes and port authority codes, her eyes caught on a series of chemical formulas listed under primary cargo. They weren't drugs. They were precursor agents for something far worse. This wasn't about smuggling. It was about weaponizing a supply chain. She looked up at Victor. "You want me to translate the logistics, but you haven't told them the full nature of the cargo, have you?" Victor's flinty eyes didn't waver. "Your job is the words spoken, not the words unspoken." The meeting was to be conducted via encrypted video link. Evelyn was placed in a chair, a discreet earpiece in one ear, a microphone pinned to her collar. Ilya stood behind her, a silent promise of violence. The screen flickered to life. On it was a man named Arslan. He had a calm, weathered face and spoke in the precise, poetic Uzbek dialect Victor's people had identified. He greeted Victor. Evelyn began to translate, her voice a neutral, clear channel. "He welcomes you and hopes your family is in good health." But she noticed something. Arslan's dialect wasn't just regional. It was academic, laced with antiquated terms for trade and honor. This man wasn't just a crime lord. He was former intelligence, possibly GRU. This changed the entire landscape. He would be listening for hesitations, for the subtle tells of a translator under duress. The negotiation began. Arslan stated his terms for the route access. Victor countered, his voice a low growl that Evelyn softened into a polite disagreement. Back and forth it went. For 20 minutes, she was the perfect pane of glass. Then Victor made his key demand: exclusive control over all security checkpoints along the route. It was a standard power grab. Arslan listened, then asked a simple, devastating question in Uzbek. "And the special containment units for the volatile materials, will they be of your provision or ours?" Evelyn's breath hitched. The question proved Arslan knew about the chemical cargo. He was testing to see if Victor would admit it. She had a split-second choice: translate it accurately and potentially blow up the deal, or alter it. She looked at Victor, then at the live feed of Mrs. Gable on a monitor to her side. She made her choice. She translated to Victor in English. "He asks about the standard shipping containers. Will they be your provision or theirs?" Victor, unaware of the trap, gave a bland answer. "Ours, of course, to ensure quality." Evelyn translated back to Arslan, but she didn't just convey the words. She leaned into the antiquated honor terminology. "The provider of the vessels guarantees their integrity with his own name, as is tradition for matters of shared trust." She framed Victor's bland answer as a solemn vow. On screen, Arslan's eyes narrowed slightly. He gave a slow nod, a point for Victor. But Ilya, who had been watching Evelyn's face, not the screen, took a step closer. He leaned down, his breath hot on her ear, and whispered in Russian, a language Arslan wouldn't understand. "Your pulse is jumping in your neck. Why?" Evelyn kept translating the next logistical point, her voice never faltering. But inside, a cold realization dawned. Ilya wasn't just muscle, he was suspicious. He was her true warden in this room, and he was starting to see the cracks in her glass. Evelyn didn't answer Ilya's whispered accusation. She kept her eyes fixed on the screen, her voice a steady stream of neutral conversion, turning harsh demands into polite suggestions, translating Arslan's flowery formalities into Victor's preferred blunt, transactional Russian. She was building a bridge of deliberate misunderstanding, and with every passing minute, Ilya's suspicion was a weight pressing between her shoulder blades. The negotiation hit its core financial term. Arslan named his price for the route access. It was high. Victor scoffed, muttered a counteroffer that was insultingly low. Evelyn translated the number accurately to Arslan, but she framed it. She used an Uzbek phrase that implied not a final offer, but an opening position from a man who respected the art of the haggle. Arslan's lips twitched. He countered, only slightly moving from his original number. Victor, hearing the translation, saw this small movement as weakness. "Good, he blinks, press him." But Ilya interjected in Russian, his eyes on Evelyn. "He didn't blink, he's amused." Her wording changed the tone. He turned to his father. "She is mediating, not translating." The room went still. The only sound was the faint hum of the video link. Victor's flinty gaze shifted from the screen to Evelyn. Is this true? Evelyn's mind raced. Denial was useless. Ilya had caught her. She chose a different truth. I am preventing a collapse, she said, switching to Russian to address them both directly. Arslan is not who you think he is. His dialect is GRU, former Soviet intelligence. He is conducting a probe. He asks about volatile materials. He knows about the chemicals. He is testing your honesty. If you lie, the deal dies, and you make an enemy who understands your business better than you do. Victor leaned back, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. It was more terrifying than his anger. You withheld this. I contained it, Evelyn corrected, a sliver of her old, negotiating self breaking through the fear. I reframed your answer into a vow of honor. He believed it. You gained trust. My intervention saved the deal. Ilya wasn't convinced. Or you are building your own deal in the space between the words. Victor held up a hand, silencing his son. He studied Evelyn. You have a different value than I anticipated, not a pane of glass. A filter, very well, continue, filter. But understand, if the deal sours, your neighbor dies slowly. If you attempt to signal him, your neighbor dies quickly. Your life is now bound to the success of my negotiation, a personal stake. The threat was recalibrated, more intimate, more horrifying. Evelyn nodded, the weight of Mrs. Gable's life now tied directly to her performance. She returned to the translation, but the game had changed. Victor and Ilya were no longer just listening to the content. They were watching her. Every pause, every breath was under scrutiny. The negotiation moved into the final, critical phase, the security protocols. Arslan demanded that his men be embedded at 2 key transit hubs. Victor refused. It was a standard impasse, but the language was thick with implied threats. As they argued, Evelyn noticed something in the dossier that had been left open on the table. A clause, buried in technical appendix, written in English. It specified that in the event of a breach of environmental containment, liability fell entirely on the provider of the primary cargo transport. Victor's organization. It was a poison pill. If those chemicals leaked, Victor would take the full legal and financial blast. Arslan's syndicate would walk away clean. Arslan hadn't mentioned this clause. Victor seemed oblivious to it. It was a trap, laid in plain sight, in a language only she in this room fully understood. A plan, dangerous and clear, began to form in Evelyn's mind. She couldn't sabotage the deal outright. Mrs. Gable would die, but she could weaponize the information asymmetry. She could turn these two powerful, dangerous men against each other, using their own words as ammunition. As Victor again refused the embedded guards, his voice rising, Evelyn translated to Arslan. But she added a subtle, crucial twist. She used a specific grammatical mood that turned Victor's refusal into a pointed challenge to Arslan's capability. The provider of the route questions the competency of your security personnel to handle the sensitive nature of the primary cargo, given the extreme liabilities involved. On screen, Arslan's calm demeanor finally cracked. His eyes hardened. He leaned forward. Does he now? He said, his voice dropping. Then perhaps he should read Clause 7.2 of the technical annex. In detail, perhaps his own competency with sensitive cargo should be reviewed. Victor, hearing the translation, blinked. What clause? What is he talking about? Evelyn feigned confusion. He references a clause in the annex about liability. She gestured to the dossier. Victor snatched the papers, his eyes scanning. He found it. His face darkened to a thunderous purple. He slammed his fist on the table. This was not in the draft I approved. You tried to bury me. The negotiation shattered into open hostility. Victor accused Arslan of deceit. Arslan accused Victor of negligence. Evelyn translated it all faithfully now, pouring gasoline on the fire. The original deal was crumbling, but a new, more dangerous dynamic was born, mutual, seething distrust. Ilya watched the meltdown, then his eyes locked on Evelyn. He saw no panic in her face, only intense, focused calculation. He understood before his father did. She's doing this, he said, his voice low with lethal certainty. She engineered this. Victor, enraged, turned from the screen. Stop the translation, mute us. The audio from their side was cut. Arslan's image on screen was now speaking into silence, his expression growing confused, then suspicious. Victor stalked around the table toward Evelyn. You think you are clever? You have just destroyed a $200 million accord. No, Evelyn said, not shrinking back. I revealed a $200 million trap. That clause would have bankrupted you at the first accident. Arslan was going to let you sign your own death warrant. I prevented that. You overstepped, Victor roared. You hired a translator, Evelyn fired back, her own fear sublimating into a cold, professional fury. You got a strategist. A bad strategist lets you walk into a trap. A good one shows you the trap and gives you a chance to spring it on the one who dug it. The room froze again. Ilya's hand had moved to the gun at his hip, but Victor was listening, a strange, calculative light replacing the rage in his eyes. Spring it how? Evelyn took a breath. This was the pivot, the point of no return. He thinks you're a greedy, careless brute. Use that, let the deal for the original route die. Express outrage, then in a day or two have a lower-level contact, not you reach out, apologize for the misunderstanding. Offer a concession, a different, less valuable route, one you don't even fully control. Let him think he's swindling you, but the real play is the information. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You now know he uses legalistic traps. He knows you have someone who can spot them. The relationship is poisoned, so turn it. During the talks for the secondary route, I will mistranslate deliberately. I will feed him false information about your shipping schedules, your port vulnerabilities. You can use that to bait him into making a move. And when he does, you'll be waiting. You don't just get a route. You get to dismantle a competitor and take all his routes. Victor was silent for a full minute. He looked at his son. Ilya's expression was unreadable, but he gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod. The value proposition had shifted once more. Evelyn was no longer a translator or even a filter. She was a potential weapon, an asset of unpredictable power. And why, Victor asked slowly, would you, who values her quiet life, propose such an aggressive, dangerous play? Evelyn met his gaze. Because the moment you took me, my quiet life ended. You've shown me that my skill only brings me two things, predators or protectors. I choose to be the latter for a price. What price? Mrs. Gable goes on a long, all-expenses-paid vacation to a location I choose right now, verified. Then we talk about my fee for services rendered, not as a hostage, as a consultant. It was an audacious power grab, from kidnapped translator to demanded consultant in the span of a disastrous call. Ilya's hand tightened on his gun, but Victor began to laugh. It was a dry, rasping sound. Consultant, I like it. He turned to Ilya. Make the old woman disappear, pleasant-like, then bring Miss Shaw something to eat. We have new plans to discuss. As Ilya moved to make the call, a new monitor flickered on. It was a security feed from outside the warehouse. Two black sedans, unmarked, had just pulled up. Men in dark jackets were exiting, moving with coordinated precision. Not Arslan's men, not Victor's. Ilya froze. Papa, we have visitors. Victor looked at the screen, then at Evelyn, his newfound amusement vanishing. Did you signal someone? Evelyn's heart plummeted. No, I couldn't have. The main power to the conference room cut out, plunging them into darkness save for the emergency exit signs. The video link screen died. In the sudden silence, they heard the distant sound of a door being forced. Ilya drew his gun, pushing Evelyn into a corner. Who else knew you were taking her? He hissed at his father. Victor drew his own weapon, his face grim. No one. But Evelyn, crouching in the dark, knew that wasn't true. Someone had known. Mr. Vasco, the polite man from the library who requested the Baltic folio. The man who watched her hands. He wasn't just a scout for Victor. He was someone else's scout too, and he had led a second set of wolves right to their door. In the suffocating dark, the only certainty was violence. A staccato burst of suppressed gunfire echoed from the warehouse entrance, followed by shouts in guttural, unfamiliar Slavic. Not Russian, not the methodical breach of police. This was a competing dialect of chaos. Ilya didn't hesitate. He grabbed Evelyn by the arm, his grip like iron, and yanked her toward a service door behind the conference table. Move. Victor was already there, throwing it open to reveal a dimly lit concrete corridor. They plunged into the maze of the industrial complex, the sounds of pursuit close behind. Evelyn's mind, trained for parsing subtlety in silence, was overloaded with raw adrenaline. But one thought pierced through. Mr. Vasco had sold her location twice. She was now the contested prize in a bidding war she never entered. They burst into a cavernous loading bay. A single van, Victor's escape vehicle, sat near a roll-up door. Two of Victor's men lay on the ground near it, dark pools spreading around them, ambushed at their own exit. From the shadows across the bay, a voice called out in Czech. "Orlov, you have something that doesn't belong to you. The linguist. Hand her over and you can crawl back to your sewer." Victor pressed against a steel pillar, peering into the gloom. "Petr Zeleny," he muttered to Ilya, a curse. "Prague. A rival, but not a major one. A mid-tier operator known for brutal efficiency and poaching assets. This was an opportunistic grab. Zeleny must have intercepted Vasco's communications or turned the man himself." Ilya assessed the situation. 3 visible muzzle flashes in the shadows, likely 2 more flanking. They were outgunned and cornered. He looked at Evelyn, then at his father, a silent question hanging in the air. The value of the asset versus the cost of extraction. Evelyn saw the calculation in their eyes. She was about to become a bargaining chip, traded to Zeleny for safe passage. Or worse, a liability to be discarded. Her brief stint as a consultant was over before it began. She had 1 card left to play, and it wasn't a language any of these men spoke. As Victor drew a breath to negotiate, Evelyn acted. She wrenched her arm from Ilya's slackened grip and stepped into the open bay, her hands raised. "Don't shoot," she yelled in English, then repeated it in clear, deliberate Czech. Neo streluged, "I am coming out. I am the linguist. I will cooperate." "Evelyn, get back," Ilya hissed, but it was too late. From across the bay, Zeleny's voice came again, intrigued. "Smart girl, walk to the center, slowly." She did, her heart hammering against her ribs. As she passed the fallen guards, her foot nudged something metallic. A key fob dropped from a dead man's hand. She didn't break stride. She kept walking, drawing all eyes to her. When she reached the center of the bay, under the harsh glare of a single safety light, she stopped. "I am here," she announced in Czech. "Tell your men to lower their weapons. The tension is compromising my cognitive function. I am no use to anyone if I am panicked." A laugh echoed. Zeleny stepped from the shadows. He was a compact man with a neatly trimmed beard and cold, appraising eyes. "You negotiate already, I like this. Lower your guns." His men complied, their weapons dipping slightly. Victor and Ilya, still behind cover, were frozen spectators. "Now," Zeleny said, walking toward her, "you will come with me. You have work to do. Orlov's deal is ash. I have better clients." "I understand," Evelyn said, her voice submissive. Then she switched to Hungarian, a language Zeleny was less likely to know, and spoke rapidly, not to him, but to the empty air around them, her tone shifting to one of urgent command. "Alpha team, hold position. Target is confirmed. Zeleny, Petr, prepare to extract primary asset on my mark. Do not let Orlov's group interfere." The effect was instantaneous. Zeleny froze, his eyes darting to the dark rafters, the second-level catwalks. He barked at his men in Czech. "She's wired. It's a setup. There's another team." His men swung their guns up, not at Evelyn, but at the shadows, their discipline breaking into confused alarm. In that second of chaos, Evelyn dropped to the floor. A shot rang out, not from the rafters, but from behind her. Ilya, seizing the distraction, had fired, hitting one of Zeleny's men in the leg. The firefight erupted. Evelyn scrambled on her hands and knees, not toward Zeleny, not back to Victor, but toward the van. She snatched the key fob from the ground as she moved. Bullets sparked off the concrete around her. She reached the van, yanked the driver's door open, and scrambled in. The engine turned over with a roar. She wasn't a great driver, but panic was an excellent teacher. She slammed the vehicle into reverse, crashing through the cheap aluminum of the roll-up door and into the night. In her rearview mirror, she saw the flash of gunfire from the loading bay. She didn't know who was winning. She didn't care. She was out. She drove blindly for 10 minutes, turning at random until she found herself in a derelict industrial park. She killed the engine and sat in the dark, shaking uncontrollably. She had no phone, no money. Victor's men, Zeleni's men, and possibly Arslan's men would all be hunting her. Mrs. Gable's fate was unknown. She was utterly alone. This was the consequence of her skill. It didn't make her indispensable. It made her a target for every power-hungry ghost in the underworld. As the shakes subsided, a cold, clear fury took their place. She was tired of being a pawn. Mr. Vasco had been the pivot. He was the point of leakage. Find him, and she might find a thread to pull to unravel this whole nightmare. But how? He was a ghost like her. Then she remembered the Baltic Folio, 1740, maritime trade agreements. He hadn't been interested in the content. He'd been watching her hands, her procedures. He was assessing her security protocols, her routines for the snatch. That was a professional scout's move, and professionals have patterns, they have preferences, they have archives. A memory surfaced. In Madrid, after the incident, she'd been debriefed by a private security firm hired by the cartel to find out who leaked the mistranslation. The investigator, a weary ex-Mossad agent named Levin, had told her, "Everyone in our business leaves a signature. The choice of weapon, the method of entry, the type of pressure applied. It's a calling card. Find the card, you find the man." Mr. Vasco's calling card was his taste. The polite demeanor, the specific historical interest, the well-tailored but nondescript clothes. He wasn't just muscle. He was a connoisseur of intelligence, the kind of man who would frequent certain places. Auction houses for rare manuscripts, private library viewings, academic conferences on obscure trade history. Evelyn started the van. She had one place to go, the library. It was a trap, obviously. They'd be watching it. But it was also the only scene of the crime that belonged to her asterisk. And in the archives, she knew how to find ghosts. Dawn was bleeding into the sky when she parked 3 blocks away. She approached the library from the service alleys, using knowledge of the garbage pickup schedules and delivery routes she'd absorbed over years. She slipped in through a receiving bay door whose lock had been faulty for months, a fact only the staff knew. The rare books archive was as she left it, silent, undisturbed. She went straight to the visitor log for the past week. There he was, Mr. A. Vasco, a false name, but he'd left a contact email for the request form, a generic-looking string of letters and numbers. She recognized the structure. It was a dead drop format, a one-time use relay. This was a dead end. She slumped into her chair, the weight of despair returning. Then her eyes fell on her own workstation, on the digital catalog she'd been updating. Every item requested by a patron was logged with a time stamp and a terminal ID. She pulled up the record for the Baltic Folio. Mr. Vasco had viewed the digital scan on Terminal 4. Terminal 4 had a localized cache, and the library's ancient, underfunded system didn't automatically clear cached search data. With a few keystrokes, she pulled the cache history. Before he looked at the Baltic Folio, Mr. Vasco had searched the catalog, not for other maritime documents. He had searched for one specific, unique accession number, the number for a collection of coded letters between 17th-century French diplomats. Evelyn knew that collection intimately. She had been the one to partially break the cipher for a journal article 2 years prior. The article was published under a pseudonym, but the library's internal submission records tied that pseudonym to her employee file. That was the thread. He hadn't just been scouting a random linguist. He had been targeting her asterisk, specifically. Her past had found her, not Victor. The realization was a sucker punch. This wasn't random. It was a retrieval, but by whom? Victor thought he'd found her. Zeleny was trying to steal her, but someone else had been looking for her first, using a scout with the sophistication to trace an academic pseudonym through library records. This was a player with patience, resources, and a deep interest in her specific mind. A soft click echoed in the silent archive, the sound of the main door locking. Evelyn spun around. A figure stood in the doorway of the archival suite, backlit by the morning light from the hallway. It was Ilya. It wasn't a thug. It was Mr. Vasco. He held no weapon. He held a simple, thick envelope. "Good morning, Miss Shaw," he said, his voice still polite, but now stripped of its pretense. "Or should I say Rook?" He used the pseudonym from her article. "You are remarkably difficult to keep track of. First Madrid, now this. You stir up such inconvenient attention." "Who are you?" Evelyn demanded, her voice steady despite the fear. "A recruiter," he said, placing the envelope on a nearby cart and taking a step back. "The offer inside is genuine, and it is your only viable exit. Your skills have attracted the attention of children playing at war. We are the adults. We offer protection, purpose, and a clean slate. No more Victor Orlovs, no more Petr Zelenis." "What's the catch?" "The catch," Vasco said, a faint smile touching his lips, "is that you can never be Evelyn Shaw again. But you already knew that was over, didn't you? Read the offer. There is a time, a place, and a method of response inside. You have 24 hours. After that we withdraw and you are left to the wolves. I suggest you choose wisely." He gave a slight nod, then turned and walked away. The lock on the door disengaged with another soft click. He was gone. Evelyn stared at the envelope. It was plain, cream-colored, heavy stock. It represented a third path, not captivity under a syndicate, not a frantic life on the run, but another kind of cage entirely. A gilded one with a purpose. She opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a job description, not for translation, for strategic semantic analysis and applied psycholinguistics. The employer was a consortium she recognized, a shell name that often appeared in leaks about private intelligence contractors working for national governments, the kind that operated in the gray space between spies and soldiers. The pay was astronomical. The conditions were absolute: a new identity, total immersion, zero external contact for a minimum of 5 years. They weren't just offering her a job, they were offering to erase her and build something new in her place, a weapon of perfect clarity. As she read the cold, clinical terms, her eyes fell on the final line, a postscript handwritten in elegant script. It read, "P.S. We have relocated your neighbor, Mrs. Gable, to a pleasant coastal village. She believes she won a charitable holiday. She is safe. This is a demonstration of capability and of goodwill. The next demonstration will be of consequence." They had Mrs. Gable. They had been watching the entire time. They allowed Victor to take her, allowed the negotiation to collapse, allowed the firefight to happen, all to burn away her other options, to herd her toward this single, stark choice. She wasn't a pawn, she was a rook, just as her pseudonym implied, a piece moving straight lines through a captured field, and the board, she now understood, was much, much larger than she had ever imagined. The syndicates were just noise. The real game had just begun, and she was already on the clock. The envelope didn't just contain an offer, it contained a verdict. Evelyn sat in the silent archive, the morning sun cutting through the dust motes, and understood the brutal geometry of her life. Every path led to a different kind of prison. The syndicates offered a cage of violence and constant threat. On the run, she'd live in a cage of paranoia and poverty. The consortium offered a cage of absolute control, but with purpose, protection, and unimaginable resources. It was the only door that didn't immediately lead to a bullet or a slow, terrifying end. She had 24 hours. She spent the first 12 not deciding, but investigating. Using the library's secure academic networks, she began digging into the shell company named in the offer. It was a ghost, but ghosts cast shadows. She found tendrils connecting it to closed-door parliamentary hearings on transnational security, to subcontracts for linguistic analysis in conflict zones, to quiet funding for cognitive science research at 3 elite universities. This wasn't a spy agency. It was something newer, something that sat at the intersection of intelligence, psychology, and global capital. They didn't just want a translator. They wanted a human algorithm, one that could predict social fissures by analyzing language drift, that could broker ceasefires not between nations, but between rival corporations controlling water rights or rare earth minerals. This was the real game. The underworld of Victor and Arslan was a messy, violent flea market compared to this high-altitude, sterile battlefield where wars were fought with semantic precision and economic leverage. Her skill wasn't for preventing gang wars. It was for shaping the world that came after them. As night fell, she made her decision, but Evelyn Shaw was done being passive. If she was to be a weapon, she would help design her own trigger. She used the method in the envelope, a secure, encrypted link accessed from a specific public terminal at the central bus station. She typed her reply, not in English, but in a complex, layered message using classical Greek syntax to frame her agreement, Latin for the terms, and a line of medieval code at the end that translated to a single word, audit. She would join, but she would observe, analyze, and judge them as surely as they would her. The response came within minutes. Coordinates, a private airfield, a time, bring nothing, you are everything we require. She left the library for the last time. She didn't look back. At the airfield, a sleek, unmarked jet awaited. Mr. Vasco stood at the foot of the stairs. "Welcome aboard, Rook," he said. There was no one else. No guards. The implication was clear. She was choosing to walk up those stairs. Her compliance was her shackle. The jet took her to a facility that wasn't on any map. It was part campus, part clinic, part fortress, nestled in an alpine valley. The first month was deconstruction. They stripped away Evelyn Shaw. Through a combination of immersive training, tailored psychometrics, and what they called contextual recalibration, they reforged her. She learned advanced negotiation theory, geopolitical forecasting, and the tools of information warfare. But her core skill was honed to a razor's edge. She practiced interpreting not just words, but vocal stress microtremors, the subtext of syntax chosen by non-native speakers, the hidden meaning in the metaphors used by different cultures to describe power. Her handlers, a rotating cast of academics and former intelligence analysts, never gave their real names. She was simply Rook. She learned that the consortium's clients were governments, multinational corporations, and ultra-high net worth individuals. Their currency wasn't secrets, but stability. They were paid to prevent wars, to engineer soft landings for regime changes, to ensure billion-dollar mergers didn't spark regional conflicts. 6 months in, she was given her first field assessment, not as an observer, as the lead. The client was a European energy conglomerate. They needed to renegotiate a port access deal with a local governor in a volatile Southeast Asian nation. The official translators were unreliable. The governor's dialect was rare, and he was known to use elaborate, proverbial language to hide his true demands. The consortium's job was to ensure the deal went through without sparking local unrest that could disrupt operations. Evelyn was inserted as a cultural attaché for the conglomerate. She sat in the ornate negotiating hall, listening as the governor wove tales of ancestral lands and the spirit of the river. The corporate lawyers were baffled. Evelyn listened, and she heard something else. Beneath the proverbs was a precise mathematical demand about revenue sharing, couched in the language of communal respect. He wasn't being poetic. He was being legally ingenious, tying the deal to traditional land use laws that would give him far more power than a standard contract. She translated this hidden structure to the CEO. Then she did something unscripted. She addressed the governor directly in his own dialect, using a proverb of her own about wise men who build bridges that carry the weight of both the future and the past. She proposed a subsidiary structure that would funnel a percentage of profits into a community trust, administered locally but audited internationally. It satisfied the governor's hidden legal gambit by honoring its spirit while protecting the client's interests. The deal was signed. The client was thrilled. The consortium's internal report classified her performance as exceptional with adaptive innovation. She had passed. She was no longer an asset. She was an operative. Years blurred. Rook became a whispered legend in certain circles, the polyglot phantom who could walk into a room where 5 languages were being spoken and exit with a consensus nobody saw coming. She brokered a deal that prevented a water war in Central Asia. She unraveled a corporate espionage ring by identifying inconsistencies in translated technical documents. She was the ultimate neutral party because she belonged to no party except the consortium. But the cage, however gilded, was still a cage. Her every move was monitored. Her handlers were her wardens. She had no life outside the work. The loneliness was profound. She sometimes thought of Ilya's suspicious glare, Victor's calculating smile. They had been monsters, but they were human monsters. Here she was surrounded by elegant, polite ghosts. Then, during a deep background check for a potential client, a tech billionaire with ties to controversial data mining, Evelyn found a thread, a financial flow, expertly hidden, that led back to the consortium itself. The billionaire wasn't just a client. He was a silent partner. The consortium wasn't just mediating conflicts. It was sometimes creating the market conditions for them, then selling the solution. They were playing both sides. The realization was a quiet, cold explosion. She had traded one set of manipulators for another, more sophisticated set. She was not an instrument for stability. She was a tool for controlled chaos, for profit. She began a secret, internal audit of her own, using her access to cross-reference clients and outcomes. The pattern was subtle but undeniable. The consortium didn't just solve problems, it curated them. She was preparing her findings, planning an unknown escape, when she was summoned to the office of the director, a man she knew only as Locke. He was a man in his 60s with a calm, paternal demeanor that she now understood was his most effective weapon. "Rook," he said, gesturing to a chair, "your work in Kazakhstan was masterful. You've exceeded every expectation." "Thank you, sir." He leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "We have a new assignment, the highest priority. It involves a series of trade negotiations between a consortium of African nations and a foreign power. The language landscape is deliberately opaque. We believe it's a smokescreen for a military pact. We need you to penetrate it." Evelyn nodded. "I'll review the briefing." "There's more," Locke said, his eyes locking onto hers. "Your old friend, Victor Orlov, has resurfaced. He's trying to broker his own side deal, selling arms to a faction within one of the nations. He's a destabilizing element. We cannot have him there." "A test or a trap or both? What are my parameters?" "Neutralize his influence," Locke said smoothly. "By any means necessary. You are authorized to use your knowledge of his operations, his patterns. You have context we lack." They were asking her to destroy Victor, to use the intimate fear and knowledge from her kidnapping to eliminate him as a variable. It was the final severing of her past. It was also a chance. "I understand," Evelyn said. The operation was complex, layered. She was deployed to a secure compound in a neutral country. Victor was indeed there, trying to woo officials with lavish parties. Evelyn worked from the shadows, using intercepted communications to feed information to his rivals, to subtly alter the translation of his offers to make them seem disrespectful, to turn his own greed against him. Within 2 weeks, Victor's access evaporated. He left the country in disgrace, his reputation in tatters. Locke was pleased. "Elegant work, Rook. Completely deniable. You've matured." That night, Evelyn accessed the deepest layer of the consortium's internal network. She input a sequence of commands she had prepared over months. It wasn't a hack. It was a dead man's switch wrapped in a gift. She packaged her entire internal audit, the evidence of the consortium's market manipulation, and encrypted it. Then she sent it, not to the authorities, not to the media. She sent it to Ilya Orlov. The file was delivered with a single, untraceable message in Russian: "The people who really betrayed your father's business. A gift from the ghost in the kitchen." Let the monsters fight each other. She had just lit the match. The next morning, she was called to Locke's office again, but it was Locke who sat behind the desk. It was Mr. Vasco. He looked older, wearier. "Hello, Evelyn," he said, using her real name for the first time in years. It sounded like a foreign word. "Where's Locke?" "Indisposed. Your file was illuminating, and your recent extracurricular data transmission has been noted." He didn't sound angry. He sounded resigned. "You were always the one asset we could not perfectly predict. Your linguistic empathy gives you a moral framework that is inconvenient." "Is this where you neutralize me?" she asked, her voice calm. Vasco smiled thinly. "No, this is where we renegotiate. You've proven you cannot be fully contained. That makes you dangerous, but it also makes you uniquely valuable for a certain kind of work. The kind where a moral compass, however troublesome, is a required component." He slid a new folder across the desk. "A new division, autonomous operations. You will be given objectives, not instructions. You will have a budget, a network, and plausible deniability. Your mandate: stabilize systems where our traditional methods create too much collateral blowback. You report only to me, and you may audit as you see fit." It was the ultimate paradox. They were giving the weapon its own targeting system. Because they couldn't control her, They were setting her loose on problems they couldn't otherwise solve. She would be free within a larger prison of her own making. Evelyn picked up the folder. "And if I refuse?" "Then you walk out that door," Vasco said, gesturing to the window, "and you return to the world as Evelyn Shaw. We will not stop you, but the world you left has not forgotten you. Victor Orlov is broken, but he is alive. Petr Zeleny holds a grudge, and Arslan never forgets a face. Your life expectancy would be measured in months." She looked at the folder, then at the Alpine Valley through the window. She had become the thing she was hired to be, the ultimate translator, not just of languages but of power. And in this new role, she saw a sliver of something resembling justice. Not the kind in storybooks, but the kind that exists in the cracks of empires, quietly shifting balances, one careful, precise word at a time. She opened the folder. "What's my first target?" Vasco's smile reached his eyes for the first time. "I thought you'd never ask." Evelyn Shaw, the librarian, was gone. Rook, the operative, was being retired. A new identity was being forged in the fire of her choices. She had started as a victim, became a pawn, then a weapon, and now she was something else entirely. A variable that even the equation makers could not define. And as she walked out of the office to begin her new work, she realized the most surprising detail of all. The consortium had given her a key to her cage, but what they didn't understand, and what she had only just begun to grasp, was that she had learned how to pick every lock in the world, not with tools, but with the right words, spoken at the right time, to the right person. And that made her the most dangerous and most indispensable person of all. So what does the story of Evelyn Shaw tell us? It's more than a thriller about a librarian in over her head. It's a blueprint of the modern world. We live in an age where information is the ultimate currency and language is the vault it's kept in. The ability to move between those vaults, to understand not just what is said, but what is meant, is a form of power that transcends borders, laws, and traditional weapons. Evelyn's journey, from a quiet archive to the nerve center of a shadow war, mirrors a hidden reality. In our world, polyglots are recruited by intelligence agencies not just to listen, but to shape narratives. Courtroom translators hold the literal power of life and death with a single interpreted word. In backroom deals that reshape economies, the person whispering the translation isn't a passive conduit. They are the architect of the agreement. Her transformation from victim to pawn to weapon, and finally to an autonomous variable, asks an uncomfortable question. In a system designed to control, is the only true freedom found in becoming so useful, so unpredictable, that you cannot be controlled? Evelyn didn't win by becoming the strongest person in the room. She won by becoming the most comprehensible asterisk. She learned to speak the native language of every power structure she encountered, the brutal pragmatism of the Syndicate, the cold calculus of the private intelligence consortium, the poetic logic of a foreign governor. In doing so, she didn't just survive their games, she began to rewrite the rules. But at what cost? She traded her name, her past, and her autonomy for a gilded cage with a mission. She became a ghost with a purpose, and that's the lingering tension her story leaves us with. Is that a victory, or is it the most sophisticated form of captivity? She may now pick her own locks, but she still lives in a labyrinth built by others. Perhaps the real lesson is about the seductive danger of a rare skill. It doesn't make you free, it makes you a target, and your only choice is to decide which hunters you can tolerate and which cage gives you enough room to breathe. Evelyn chose the cage that let her think and act and influence the world from the shadows, a world away from the library, but using every tool she found there. Her story is a reminder that the most critical negotiations aren't happening in public view. They're happening in silent rooms, through interpreters, where a shifted nuance can redirect billions, spark a conflict, or broker a fragile peace. The people in those rooms are the invisible gears turning our world. And sometimes, the quietest person there, the one just translating the words, is the one actually writing history. What did you think? Was Evelyn's final deal with the consortium a smart compromise, or did she simply trade one master for another? Could she have found another way out? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you were captivated by this story of hidden power and linguistic warfare, please show your support by hitting that like button. It helps more people discover these deep dives into the shadows. Share this with a friend who loves stories where the mind is the ultimate weapon. And for more documentaries that unravel the hidden systems shaping our world, make sure to subscribe. Thanks for listening.